Well, the Zags are 1-0 in conference play, and Drew Timme's quest to finally win the National Player of the Year award is off to a fantastic start. Could this finally be the year for the stash?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to give you daily reports through another season of Gonzaga Hoops. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, it is finally again 2023 and Mailbag Monday is back. Maybe not back on a permanent basis. That is yet to be determined looking at the schedule. But for now, we are bringing it back, at least right now. Lots of great questions coming in over the weeks. Tried to consolidate as many as I could into a couple of different segments here for today's show. Again, Happy New Year to everybody. Appreciate you all continuing to start the year 2023 with Locked On Zags. It is very, very much appreciated. If you are interested in getting involved in Mailbag Monday, you can reach out to me on Twitter at Andy Patton CBB or at Locked On Zags. It helps if you respond to a tweet on Sunday morning soliciting questions for Mailbag Monday. Otherwise, your question may sit for a while if we're not doing Mailbag every week. But again, you can also email me at andypatton013@gmail.com. All right, let us get right into these questions. This first question here comes from Christian via Gmail. Christian says, what is the path for Drew Timme to win Player of the Year? Well, Drew, over the last 7 games, this fact came from Jared Benson of formerly of ESPN Stats and Info. He tweeted that Drew Timme over his last 7 games is averaging 27.3 points, 9.5 rebounds, 4 assists on 70% shooting. The last player to put numbers up similar to that in a 7-game stretch in college basketball was Zion Williamson in that 2018-2019 season. So basically the answer to this question is to keep doing that. Keep putting up elite, really, really difficult to reach numbers and insane efficiency the way Drew has always been. 70% shooting over his last 7 games. Yeah, that includes a couple of Gonzaga's easier games, but it also includes the Alabama game, one of the best teams, if not the best team that Gonzaga has played this year. So certainly, not anything to shake your head at there. The toughest part for Drew Timme to win National Player of the Year is the performance of Purdue big man Zach Edey. Zach Edey is right now the front runner for Player of the Year. He plays a more difficult conference schedule. He has more opportunities to cut his teeth against elite caliber bigs. If he continues to play well, continues to play 28 to 30 minutes per game, continue to put up 23 points, 12 to 15 rebounds per game, it's going to be really hard for Drew to eclipse that. Because even if Drew puts up better numbers, even if his overall season numbers come close to that or even top that, I'm not sure he'll get there in rebounds. He may clip him in points, total points per game, but Edey's going to have a tougher schedule. And if Purdue remains the number 1 team in the country, certainly if Purdue doesn't lose, I think that's unlikely. Purdue is going to lose eventually, but if Purdue doesn't lose, or if it takes them a long time to lose, or if they only lose 1 or 2 games, and Edey is the big reason why, I don't see how Drew Timme wins Player of the Year. And it's not necessarily because he's not a better basketball player. It's just because Edey's doing it on a team that's number 1 in the country, that's got a better record, that's playing in a better conference. However, Drew Timme's got a really good chance. He's got as good a chance as anybody not named Zach Edey. I think he's second right now. He's having a better season than some of the other bigs that were expected to compete for this award. Better season than Hunter Dickinson. Better season than Trace Jackson Davis at Indiana. Better season than Oscar Tshiebwe at Kentucky. Better season than Armando Bacot at North Carolina. Like, he's right in that conversation. For me, it's Edey. It's Drew Timme. I think Azuolas Tubelis from Arizona has kind of put himself in that conversation as well. And of course, Marcus Sasser at Houston's having a really nice year. So there's a handful of guys right in that conversation. But for me, I think it's going to come down to Timme and Edey. But I'm leaning Edey right now, unless he struggles or if Drew just goes absolutely nuclear for the rest of the season, which quite frankly could happen. Next question here comes from Larry via Gmail. Larry says, you've discussed few making players earn playing time and how that might affect Malachi Smith. The combo of Timme, Watson, Strother, and Smith could be tough for any team to outscore. Any chance few would get those four playing more playing time together, maybe by starting Smith? Yeah, I guess I don't really buy the concept, and I don't think Mark Few buys the concept either, that you need all of your best scorers to play all together all the time. I think that that's actually adverse to what you want to do. You need to spread out your scoring a little bit. You look at some of the best NBA teams currently, or of course in the past, and a lot of them have brought high-level scorers off the bench. Of course, Manu Ginobili, Jamal Crawford, they're primary examples of that. And you look even back in college, Gonzaga has brought good scorers off the bench in the past as well. And I think that it helps balance the team out. You don't want all of your scorers in the same spot. You need to have guys who are comfortable in their roles. And for Malachi Smith, it took him a while to find that comfort, in part because he was coming from a system where he was the man. He played 40 minutes a game, basically. He had the ball in his hands at an extraordinarily high usage rate, and he was trying to figure out how to adjust to that. I think Mark Few's decision to have him come off the bench made sense because Malachi could be that player in the second unit. He could come off the bench and he would be playing alongside guys like Hunter Salas, alongside Ben Gregg, alongside guys who weren't the focal point offensively in a situation that allowed Smith to be more free-flowing, more opportunistic as a scorer, kind of fit more what his skill set was. You put him directly in the starting lineup and tell him you're the fourth option or you're the fifth option offensively, that's really hard for him to adjust to. So I think that Mark Few did the right thing by having Malachi come along slowly, having him be in a bit more of a backup role. And now he's still coming off the bench, but he's playing 25, 20 minutes per game. And quite frankly, he's playing a lot of minutes alongside Drew Timme, alongside Julian Strother, alongside Anton Watson. So it's not like he's not playing with those guys already. I think a huge chunk of his minutes should come not playing with those guys, because I think that gives him more opportunity to be the player that he is. Whereas when you pigeonhole him and force him to play alongside guys who need the ball in their hands a lot to score, it creates a situation where he's not really being the most effective version of himself as a basketball player. Next question here comes again from Christian via Gmail. Christian says, you already addressed this, but is there a way for Dom Harris and Efton Reid to get role player minutes? Ben Gregg and Hunter Salas are taking the roles that Anton Watson and Aaron Cook played a few seasons ago. Yeah, it's the same conversation we have every year, at least the last 5 years or so. The 9th or 10th guys just don't play very much in Mark Few's system. And there can be an argument that they should play more, and I'm amenable to hearing that argument. I believe that there is probably some situations where Mark Few rides starters too long when he doesn't necessarily need to do that. But ultimately right now, Mark Few plays 8 guys. He likes the 8 guys that he has. These 2 guys are right outside the rotation. For Efton Reid, I think it's fairly simple. He's just stylistically a similar basketball player to Drew Timme. And so those 2 guys do not play well together. We saw Mark Few attempt to play these 2 guys together, and it went very poorly. It's just not a lineup that works all that well. So Efton would only play when Drew's not playing. And quite frankly, when Drew's not playing, the Zags are typically going smaller. They have Anton Watson playing the 5. Maybe they have Watson and Gregg both out there. Maybe they just have Watson, Strother, and 3 guards out there, but they're usually playing a smaller ball lineup. So it just doesn't create a lot of opportunities for Reid. He's going to play a lot more starting next season, assuming Drew leaves. And he's going to be a big part of this team's, what this team does. Just right now, he's just not an obvious fit on the court for the majority of the game. For Dom Harris, he's just not as good or as ready to play as the other guards on this team. You could make an argument that he should be playing more and should be playing over so-and-so, but I don't see that necessarily. I think he's a very good player, and I think he's going to be a good player in this program if he sticks it out and stays around, but I don't think there's an obvious player he should be playing more minutes than. And yes, he had a really good game against Eastern Oregon. So did every other one of Gonzaga's guards. Hickman was awesome in that game. Salas, awesome in that game. Smith, Bolton, awesome in that game. I loved what we saw from Dom. I want to see if he's capable of playing within Gonzaga's offense. That game at that point was really just free for all. It was like they weren't really running a lot of stylistic, what Gonzaga normally runs. And Dom looked great doing that and kind of free, just playing free and playing loose. And that's great. That's great that he can do that. But I don't know that we've seen what he can do in Gonzaga's offense. And that's not to say he can't do that. He just hasn't been given the opportunities to do that just yet. But I just think right now those guys are just on the outside looking in. I'd be not shocked. I'd be surprised if they carved out legitimate rotation minutes before the end of the year. But I think we'll see them quite a bit as the year goes on when Gonzaga has big wins, when there's some foul trouble situations like that. I do think these guys will get playing time. I just don't think it's going to be super consistent for the rest of the year. All right, we got more listener-submitted questions coming your way. In the second segment, we got talk about Gonzaga's win over Pepperdine, and we're looking at the best story for the non-conference slate. But before we get there, I want to tell you all about LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people to hire for your team faster and for free. It's extremely simple to use. Start by adding your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to let people know that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, segment 2, still Edey Patton, still Locked On Zags, and I still want to thank you all for coming into 2023 and making Locked On Zags your first listen of the day. For your second listen today, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights that only Locked On can provide. It's 2023. It's time to change up the routine. Locked On Sports Today. It's available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. All right, still hammering through Mailbag Monday. Got some great questions this week, as always. This next one comes from Christian via Gmail. Christian says, though I listened to the Pepperdine game on the radio, it appeared the pace was perfect and played into the ideal rhythm, tempo, and style that our Zags like to play. The result was 111 points, 6 players in double figures, and 61% from the field. This is great when a team plays that style that the Waves play. What adjustments will need to be made for an opponent that can slow down the pace? Insert St. Mary's ×2. Yeah, I think this has always kind of been the question. And when teams try to run with Gonzaga, it rarely works. We've seen it for a really long time. I mean, even Alabama, one of the best teams in the entire country, effectively tried to run with Gonzaga, and it did not work. The teams that have beat Gonzaga this year and in previous years have done it basically by completely preventing Gonzaga's ability to get out in transition and forcing them to beat you in the half court. St. Mary's very good at this, very, very good at this. They're good at preventing Gonzaga from getting out in transition. They have a very, very slow-paced but highly efficient offense. That is how they win most of the games that they play, and they're going to present a problem for Gonzaga this year as well. The biggest thing always for the last few years for Gonzaga is extreme efficiency from Drew Timme. Drew Timme shooting 70% in his last 7 games. I don't think this St. Mary's team has as much depth in the front court to really, really body up Drew Timme. Mitchell Saxon, very good young player, or not even a young player anymore. I think he's a junior now. He's been around for a while, but he has played well against Drew Timme in the past. He's not as good as Matthias Toss, who was outstanding for the Gales last year, but I still think he's going to present some problems for Drew. But by and large, if Drew can have an effective night, and then, of course, you need a strong shooting night from beyond the arc. If you can't get out in transition, get easy buckets that way, you need to really, really shoot well from beyond the arc, stretch the defense. That gives Drew Timme more room to operate down low. And then I think the other big thing is more discipline on defense. The Zags didn't play a great defensive game against Pepperdine. We'll talk about that more here in the next question. But you can get away with that when you score 111 points. The Zags are not going to score 111 points on St. Mary's. It is not going to happen. They are not going to score probably more than 75 points against St. Mary's. So in that situation, you have to be more disciplined on defense, not get caught up in the pick and roll as much as they did against Pepperdine. So efficient night from Drew Timme, more discipline on defense. That's the recipe to beating St. Mary's. It's not going to be easy. Zags got them twice, maybe 3 times this year. We'll see if they can pick off all of those wins. Next question here comes from Peter via Gmail. Peter says, I continue to worry about Gonzaga's defense. The Pepperdine game did little to allay my concerns. Ken Pom has the Zags ranked 63rd on adjusted defensive efficiency. Given Coach View's coaching priorities, do you expect this team's defense to improve? Are Gonzaga's players capable of playing better defense? Are there defensive lapses related to playing quick tempo, fast breaking offense? I think Pepperdine in particular was a bit of a matchup issue. Pepperdine has multiple likely NBA players. Maxwell Lewis is an NBA player. He's probably a first-round pick in 2023. Gonzaga doesn't play that many guys like that just throughout the season. Obviously, they played Brandon Miller, who's one of the top 5, maybe top 10 picks in the NBA draft this upcoming year. And he scored 36 points against them in the Alabama game. Maxwell Lewis, likely first round pick as well. He had 20 in this one, despite some foul trouble that cost him a lot of minutes. I think that this is a good Pepperdine team. I think that they're not a great defensive team and they have some high level offensive players, but I do think Gonzaga's defense will improve as they get more into conference play. We've seen teams gash them up pretty good in the pick and roll, and part of that is some coaching. Gonzaga needs to figure out what they want to do on that end of the floor. There's some inconsistency. There's still some communication breakdown that seems to happen. I think a more concise and more consistent, this is what we do on picks. You see Drew Timme is fantastic at hedging that high screen and forcing the guard to go all the way around him, giving him time to get back into a defensive position. He's very good at that. A lot of the rest of Gonzaga's team seems to struggle with that, or at least struggles with consistency and how they handle that. I do think there is some coaching issues here too. I also think Gonzaga's players will get better as the season goes on. I don't think they're just I don't think they've reached their maximum potential as a defensive team. But ultimately, this team's what their overall potential is capped by the fact that they don't really have a rim protector. They just don't have somebody on this team that's capable of blocking a lot of shots and erasing mistakes the defensive players make the way that Chet Holmgren did last year. And so while I think this team has a better potential than what they've showed, it's still capped by not having a guy who can erase shots in the paint. Next question here comes from Larry via Gmail. Larry says, looks like earning playing time is not cumulative, but a game time decision. This game, Hickman was struggling and Smith played more minutes than him. Is this how you see Few granting playing time? I mean, this is how all coaches grant playing time. If you're struggling at a game, you're going to play less. I don't think that that's that unusual. There's a lot of that goes into it that is stuff that we're just not privy to, that we shouldn't be privy to. Coaches have to be aware of how players respond to getting benched. If a certain player is going to respond positively to that and maybe come out and play really well the next game, then maybe you're more likely to bench a player. If a player gets really down on themselves and really struggles going forward, if you bench them, then maybe you have to kind of figure out what kind of decisions you want to make there. Some guys are okay with playing 18 minutes one game and 4 minutes the next game and 17 minutes the game after that. Some guys probably really struggle with that. And so I think there's a lot of balance that goes into how to playing time and when guys are struggling and when guys aren't struggling, that we're not even going to scratch the surface of all of the thoughts and decisions that goes into those coaching decisions. And then of course there's matchups too. Pepperdine wasn't a great matchup for Hickman. He struggled. He didn't have a horrible game. He didn't shoot it all that well, but he distributed the ball pretty well. But he just played less minutes. Maybe he wasn't feeling well. There's a whole bunch of things that go into it that we're just not necessarily privy to. But yeah, it's always a game-by-game decision. Mark Few is not going into a game saying this is exactly how many minutes everybody's going to play. You have to make adjustments on the fly, and those adjustments could be for any number of, quite honestly, thousands of different reasons that we're all not going to be necessarily aware of. Final question here comes from Brandon via Twitter DM. Brandon says, what is the biggest growth you have enjoyed during this non-conference slate? Brandon listed a handful of things that were kind of on his list. I loved all of them. I'm going to pick the one about Anton Watson, because for me, Anton Watson becoming a bona fide playmaker, a bona fide shot maker, a high-level scorer, as well as being an elite defensive player, it has been a fantastic story. You all know, people who've listened, if this is your first time listening to Locked On Zags, A, welcome, Happy New Year. B, you might be the only people who aren't aware of how much of an Anton Watson fan and supporter that I am. I love Anton Watson. I've been a fan of his. The 8th podcast I ever did when I was hosting Score Zags Score was during Anton Watson's freshman year. It was Anton Watson, past, present, future. Who's he going to become? I'm not sure I had the optimism, even at that time, to think that he would be throwing down dunks over Oscar Tshiebwe at Kentucky and doing some of the things that he has done in his career this season in particular. He still doesn't have that outside shot super consistently, but everything else we've seen him kind of grow and develop and turn into has been just a joy to watch. I think the story behind him is he was a decently highly rated recruit, but he's like top 60. He wasn't like a top 25 prospect or anything. Gets hurt, doesn't quite fulfill the potential early in his career, is more of a defensive specialist, not an offensive guy. And then he comes into his senior year, gets a chance to really step into a bigger role and emerges as Gonzaga's one of their best playmakers, quite honestly, a guy who's a really good passer, really good at getting the ball into Drew Timme, can create his own shot, do things that we didn't see him do at all for his first couple of years. And he did it against some of Gonzaga's highest level of competition they've ever played. He did it against Alabama. He did it against Kentucky. He did it against Purdue and Xavier and so many other great teams that Gonzaga has played this year. The Ben Gregg emerging has been fantastic. Nolan Hickman's growth as a point guard from the beginning of the season till now has been fantastic. overtake. But for me, the best story, hands down, is what we've seen Anton Watson become this season in Spokane. All right, well, the WCC season is now in full effect, and listeners have more questions about the conference and the women's team. But before we get to those, I want to tell you all about BetOnline. College basketball and the NBA are back in action, and that college football bowl season still going on right now as we're chatting. The NFL, of course, remains in the thick of their season as well. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports information, from all the latest odds, contests, and player props, you name it. BetOnline remains the best spot for all the latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all of the leagues this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. They even have lines for coaching changes across every major sport, so even in the offseason, you can get your fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags, still hammering through Mailbag Monday here. And the next question for segment 3 comes again from Christian via Gmail. This question was also asked by Jeff via Gmail. It says, is there a scenario where a third WCC team gets into the waltz with the Zags and the Gales in the big dance? Can you look at the teams 3 through 6 and discuss the possible path for these teams? That is Santa Clara, BYU, USF, and LMU. Yeah, the short answer here is none of them. I think the WCC is a 2-bid league this year, and I'm not sure that it's going to get challenged unless somebody else wins the WCC tournament. If Gonzaga and St. Mary's play for the WCC championship, I think at that point it's basically solidified that it will be a 2-bid league. It's disappointing to see some of those other teams that kind of made a serious run at a tournament spot last year kind of fall down. It's really hard for mid-major programs to earn that kind of pedigree. Looking at these teams individually quickly, USF's 0-2 in the WCC, and they haven't played Gonzaga and St. Mary's yet. That's basically it for them. They lost to San Diego. They lost to Santa Clara. I think that pretty much eliminates them already. It's a really strong start to the season for Chris Gerlison and the Dons, but haven't really seen that manifest beyond that. A 5-loss LMU team, out of the question. We don't need to discuss that anymore. It's just not an option for them. BYU also already has 5 losses. They maybe have a slightly better chance just because they have more marquee wins. The win over Creighton is really going to help them in that regard, especially if Creighton continues to get healthier and continues to kind of fight their way back towards the top of the Big East standings. But that BYU has zero margin for error. Zero margin for error. And I just don't buy that they're going to go undefeated. I just don't think that that's going to happen this year in the WCC. Santa Clara might actually have the best path, to be quite honest, but they have a non-conference loss to San Jose State, who's one of, if not the worst team in the Mountain West. That's a really, really tough loss. I think Santa Clara, quite honestly, would also need to be perfect. I think they need to sweep St. Mary's. They probably need to sweep Gonzaga. Certainly can't lose to any other team, even once. And I just don't think that any other team is going to be as perfect as they need to be to make the big dance this year. So I think, unfortunately, the WCC is a 2-bid league, very safely a 2-bid league, mind you, but I think that's going to be it for the conference this season. Next question here comes from Jeff via Gmail. In fact, the next couple of questions come from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff, a very passionate WCC fan, so always love to have his questions in the show. He said, what is the most surprising thing from the first week of WCC play? The fact that San Francisco went 0-2, that BYU went 2-0, or the fact that Pacific actually won a WCC game? Yeah, shout out Pacific Tigers. Always nice to see them not be complete bottom feeders in the WCC. To me, USF losing to Santa Clara and San Diego. They lost both games by double figures. Santa Clara is a really, really tough team. I think you could argue Santa Clara is a better team than San Francisco, so maybe that's not that egregious of a loss. But for the Dons, coming off of making the NCAA tournament last year, coming off a really strong non-conference season, a huge monster win over then-ranked Arizona State, for them to come into WCC play and drop their first 2 games, especially to San Diego. Steve Lavin's team hasn't looked very good this year, probably going to finish in the bottom 2 or 3 in the WCC rankings. And for USF to lose that game, I mean, that was a complete death sentence to their at-large hopes for the NCAA tournament. Really, really tough week for the Dons, and I think pretty surprising. I thought they would be a team that would maybe lose 2 or 3 games in the conference, maybe 3 or 4 games in conference play all year long. But for them to lose the first 2 and not to St. Mary's or Gonzaga, really, really tough start for them. They got Gonzaga 3 days from now as you're listening to this on Monday, and that's a pretty good chance that they're going to go 0-3 to start out conference play. Next question again from Jeff. Jeff says, will Pepperdine ever be competitive enough to beat Gonzaga? It's not like Pepperdine has lacked good players. They've had those players. This is just looking like a Notre Dame Navy situation where it took Navy 47 years before they beat Notre Dame. Never say never. Absolutely never say never. Pepperdine has come very close to beating Gonzaga. This has not been 20-something years of blowouts. They have come very close many, many times to defeating the Zags. And they've had a lot of really talented players. Colby Ross is one of the best point guards I've ever seen in the WCC. Kessler Edwards is playing for the Brooklyn Nets. I mentioned multiple times on this show that Maxwell Lewis will be a first-round pick in 2023. Houston Millett, Mike Mitchell, their other two guards, really, really talented young team. I don't think they're a particularly well-coached team. Lorenzo Romar, good recruiter, good at getting talented players into his program, not particularly good at doing much with said talented players. We'll see if that changes, but I don't think this is going to be a streak that lasts till as long as Notre Dame Navy. It's not going to go another 25 years. I'd be shocked if that happened. I don't know that there's an immediate path. I think the game in Malibu this year is going to be a heck of a lot more competitive than this one was, but I'm not making a prediction that Pepperdine is going to pull the upset there. But I do think that I think Lewis is probably gone after this year, so we'll see if Millett and Mike Mitchell can kind of carry the load for this team going forward. But I think I don't see any obvious solutions for Pepperdine in the next couple of years, but it only takes one good game and one bad game from Gonzaga for the streak to finally end. Next question here, final one of the show. The Gonzaga women are now 4-0 in WCC, and they are looking really, really good. Sure, the competition was not so great this last week, but it's not easy to beat teams by 30 or 40 points. Is anyone in the WCC going to be anywhere close to the Lady Zags this year? Sure looks like we could be in for a 20-0 WCC campaign. Yeah, I'd be surprised if they go undefeated. It's really, really hard to go undefeated. Yes, they look really good. They look like steps ahead of the other teams in the WCC. But I don't think that this women's team they're not comparable to like Gonzaga's men's team from 2021 that just rolled through everybody and didn't lose until the national championship game. This team has more flaws. They can have more challenging games. Britta Maxwell has been out of her mind shooting from beyond the arc this season, but if she struggles, the Trunk twins, they've had some injury issues. I think that this team is really, really good. And I think that I'd be surprised if they lose more than 2 WCC games, but it's hard to imagine they go fully undefeated. They won a close games against San Diego, close games against BYU. Both those games were at home. They got San Diego on the road. They got BYU on the road. They still got Portland on the road. Again, I think they'll be favored in every single WCC game going forward, and I think they should be favored in every single WCC game going forward, but that doesn't mean that they're going to win every single one of them. Of course, if they come into the WCC tournament having gone 18-2 or 19-1 in conference play with only a handful of losses in the non-conference, we could still be looking at Lisa Fortier's squad earning the best seed in Gonzaga women's basketball history come March. All right, that is going to do it for me today. Plenty more great content coming your way later in this week. Also, if you have not done so yet, go check out the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. It is hosted by myself and Isaac Shade, the host of Locked On Tar Heels. We trade off every episode with fantastic guests who've been on this show, guests who have not been on this show, but who are incredible at talking about college basketball. It is a fantastic show. Go check it out wherever you already get podcasts. Find it on YouTube. Find Locked On Zags on YouTube. If you haven't done so yet, hit that subscribe button for both of them. Let me know that you did. It's a wonderful New Year's treat for me, so I very much appreciate it. And again, thank you for making Locked On Zags your first listen of the day. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. All right, thank you all for listening, and go Zags.